Roman immediately set to work forging the weapon. He continuously struck the hot sword, repeating the same movement, while using the same temperature and strength. The moment when a person is completely absorbed in an objective thing. The idea that appeared in his mind rang out. He was absorbed. He struck the iron he was forging with great strength and certainty. In his eyes appeared a thought. What do we live for? I had to survive in a world where only qualified people could survive because my father was a demon. And then became the strongest after overcoming countless hardships that fell on my head. I never thought that was a bad thing. It's the same now. I just live true to my own reality. He continued to forge while telling himself. However, my current state was not enough to cope with each change. So I needed to train to become tough. Roman's world and the powerful forces within it. I still didn't clearly understand them. The loser didn't deserve mercy. He blew a breath of fire. The breath of fire surrounded his body. The flame fire god art. Roman madly forged weapons. A martial art created by people called flame demons. Using the power of burning to quickly accumulate mana. It was an ability best for the useless me at present. My lungs and other internal organs will be damaged if used too often. His eyes were burning with determination. But right now, I crave the power to confront all the incidents. The next day, a beautiful day at the palace. We are now. Flora reported again. We have reached a dead end. She was serious. The people around had refused to retreat and the difference in military strength was too obvious. There were talks about surrendering to preserve at least a small part of the family's territory. But I believe that is something we cannot do. No matter what the cost. Flora's father slammed his hand on the table. He stood up and spoke. Instead of sacrificing the lives of innocent soldiers for a war that was destined to be lost. Surrender was the best choice for everyone. Barco had used his connections to get a loan from the Department of Goods. If that was true, that loan could be considered as an unsecured debt. The people below listened but were confused and discussed. How? No mortgage. Flora continued her father's words. Unsecured loans often have very high interest rates. Barco was not the only one who benefited in this battle. Her father was still standing and listening. Flora continued to explain. Barco was the one who borrowed money. And the gold vault was the one who lent money. In order to receive a reward that both of them benefited from. They will peck this land as soon as they invade Lawrence. Everyone looked at her in silence. Her father sat down calmly after listening. So what should we do? She replied. There is only one way. Fight to the end. Flora affirmed. That is the only way for us to survive. He clenched his fist. Fighting back. He lowered his head, feeling disappointed in his heart. For a moment, I was looking forward to Flora's speech. I thought that Flora, who could imagine any situation, would tell us an outstanding countermeasure. But it turned out to be just ordinary words. He asked Flora, is the long-term closure the only way to survive that you mentioned? She replied, I didn't say we just hold out. Abandon the entire year's output and burn the fields. We would also like the word as much food as possible to sustain. When winter comes. He immediately wondered. We just need to hold out until winter. Flora replied, yes. Although Barco can borrow a large sum of money thanks to internal relations. But that's just it. The interest will increase over time. Her eyes were certain about what she said. The force that holds enormous power with influence spreading throughout the empire. The gold vault. If the war continues to drag on instead of ending quickly, they will put pressure on the Barco family with interest. She continued, the gold vault is not a force that can be easily threatened by internal relations. The merchants who move need money. And that money comes from the gold vault. When winter comes and the siege strategy is no longer advantageous. Here she emphasized, they will not be able to separate themselves from offering themselves as dessert. Flora's father seemed to have understood. Everyone was surprised and happy. They couldn't believe there was such a way. It was very reasonable. She was right, this was battle of time. I think so too. He sat silently in the noise of the people. Because of the matter with the Dmitri family. I thought I raised my daughter to be immature. But that's not true. When did my daughter become so mature? He put his hands on the table and stood up. He spoke. Flora was right. From this moment on, We will prepare to defend. We will endure and protect the bloodline of the Lawrence family. Even if the walls collapse and we all perish, we will endure and fight until the last moment. Flora looked at her father with a determined gaze. On this side, Roman was equally determined. He focused on continuing to forge the sword. It was a beautiful sunny day outside. The surroundings were quiet. He slowly walked out holding the newly forged sword. No matter what, a person's first time was very special. My first sword. This sword is extremely perfect for the current me. He held the sword in front of him. The name of the person who would be given to this sword. Salamander. The messenger slowly walked to the front of the castle. A strong wind appeared from somewhere, making the atmosphere even more tense. The soldiers guarding the gate could not help but tense. He chuckled lightly. Then take the paper and read. With the authorization of the Barco Count, I will give you 3 choices. First, leave the castle and surrender unconditionally. The messenger warns, surrender is the only way to save all your lives. He said loudly. Second, a land war with us. We will have a fair and equal war on a deserted open area. The messenger continued reading. Under the witness of a judge from the inner court. You can also choose to fight one-on-one. He shouted loudly. The form of war will depend on the choice you want. We will follow any decision. Lord Lawrence stood tall and watched. He spoke. We do not believe that the reason of Barco. Lord Lawrence slowly walked forward. When declaring this war legal, the document recorded our ancestors' debt is fabricated. Moreover, he suddenly shouted loudly. I also have no intention of betting the lives of the Lawrence people. Lord Lawrence said solemnly. So, tell Viscount Barco that Lawrence will never. The messenger still ignored. Continued to speak. The third choice is to give up your honor as a noble family. He looked up and continued to resist hopelessly inside the castle. The messenger continued. From this moment on, Barco will respect all your wishes. His face darkened and even drops of blood will be shed on this fierce battlefield. Making the guards tremble, Lord Lawrence's face revealed anger. The war has begun. The soldiers draw their bows. Shoot, they shouted. Advance. Not allowed to retreat. The soldiers quickly ran up to fight. A voice rang out. Damn it. Lord Barco cursed. Those brazen bastards. The soldier standing behind thought. Bacro had endured 3 times the force of Lawrence. However, he was sweating profusely. I had thought the battle would come to an end within an hour. However, the course of the battle went against expectations. The tall-browed soldier said. It seems that Lawrence has completed the preparations for this battle. Lord, he reported. They dug a ditch to prevent the soldiers from approaching the city wall. The soldier said, along with the number of arrows fired. Without hesitation from the beginning. He said, it seems that they have arranged a relatively large amount of war aid. Making the third lord extremely angry. He thought, what happened in that week? I can't believe Lawrence chose to hold out. The third lord looked at the map. Pondering, according to our calculations, Lawrence would surrender to keep as much territory as possible. No matter how little. But, in reality, his face turned pale. They risked being wiped out and the city gates were closed. Where did the situation go wrong? The soldier asked. What should we do, Lord? Lord Barco ordered. What else could it be? Use that thing. He revealed a tense expression. The order. He suddenly smiled. Lawrence's son was not a person with a strong will. The face of the 3 lords showed cunning. Calculating in his heart, he sold his precious daughter to the Dmitri family. When he could not bear the pressure from Barco, he speculated. He was the type of person who would cowardly retreat into his turtle shell. If he encountered a difficult situation, move back to the castle. Lord Lawrence ordered. Quickly move it. The soldiers immediately obeyed. Order. He reminded. We don't know when the 3 of you will continue to attack. Raise your guard and prepare your weapons. They said in unison. Obey. Lord Lawrence turned his head and said. Flora. You are right. He looked at his daughter. Barco was probably confused and ordered his soldiers to retreat. How could you think of that? She stepped forward. You realize that you yourself must become strong. Flora said seriously. Instead of waiting for the problem to be solved, she said, That is the path you will take in this life. Her words moved Lord Lawrence. Flora. He felt guilty. I apologize for forcing the marriage between you and Dimitri. At that time I thought it was the only way for our family to survive. Lord Lawrence said. But, he continued, from now on, even if no matter what situation, I believe that you will make a good choice. She said gratefully. Father. Flora's face became panicked. A bomb flew out of nowhere and exploded in front of the two people. Tuong Tan had a hole caused by the bomb. She thought in panic. Tuong Tan was destroyed. Could it be? Flora guessed that it was a missile? The spearman was shocked. Crazy. The Barco side had already prepared the rocket. The one standing beside him couldn't help but be surprised. Auntie. Impossible. The rocket was a giant magic launcher aimed at the wall. It was a magic weapon. Each shot would consume a lot of gold. Because it was a strategic weapon, it couldn't be used without the permission of the inner court, no matter how much money the owner had. Flora clenched her fists in thought. Ignoring the money they had borrowed, she couldn't believe her uncle had enough connections and wealth to borrow the rocket. She was sweating profusely. There were only two ways to stop that thing. Flora couldn't hide her panic. Counterattack with a magic weapon of the same level, or go out of the city and destroy it. Both options were impossible. She closed her eyes tightly, telling herself, we can't give up. Call. A servant appeared from somewhere and reported, Miss, we just received a magic call. Flora was confused and didn't understand what was going on. Magic, she said loudly. Roman Dimitri told me to tell you. I have a way to help, so please answer the call. What's so surprising? Flora seemed unable to believe what she had just heard. Roman Dimitri. No way. Flora Lawrence wanted him to say it clearly. Exactly what do you intend to do? Looking at Roman in the remote call magic tool, she continued, how to rescue Lawrence from danger. He replied, let me speak frankly. I have my own secret to report to the Barco family. This matter is something I have decided, and revenge is just a matter of time. She was surprised when she heard that answer. Roman continued, if the Lawrence family follows my plan. Flora listened seriously to the next words. Then I will speed up the progress and solve the Barco family for you. Flora immediately expressed her doubts. So what role do we have in your plan? He said. It's very simple. He lowered his head to look at her in the magic circle. If the Lawrence family agree to set the stage for me first by being a little sacrifice, then I will use all my strength to help you. I swear on the name Roman Dimitri. Also from sacrifice to surround that girl. Clenching her hands, she thought to herself, he must have known her situation, so he made such a request. We have no other choice. Even if he is shamelessly asking us to be sacrifices. Thinking, then Flora expressed, I promise you, as long as you can protect my family, you can do whatever you want. Now, I will discuss more conditions. And one more thing. Give me an excuse to intervene in this war. Outside the city, the enemy is currently preparing to invade. Roman explained, because our engagement has been broken off. I will need another excuse. She looked a little worried. What kind of excuse? He opened his mouth. Her uncle Anthony said he had lied to her. The girl was stunned when she heard that excuse. Roman continued to instruct. She just needed to say that even though nothing had happened between the two of them, she had no choice but to cancel her engagement with Dimitri because she had been lied to like that. Followed by the other guy's face showing a sinister smile. He analyzed the future afterwards. Her value in the noble circle would be zero. Flora would kneel before the people standing to judge. And her beautiful reputation as the flower of the Lawrence family would be shattered. Roman emphasized in conclusion, however, if she gave up everything that being a daughter of a noble family had given her, she would have an important excuse that was indispensable to solve the danger of the Lawrence family. Flora was imagined as a bluebird that escaped from the chain. His eyes looked at her calmly. That was the excuse I need to intervene in this war. Her hands were placed in front of her chest. Her whole body was shaking. He gave a reassuring word. If the time of being harassed was before she broke off the engagement, then she was still mine. Roman affirmed that, I will not forgive anyone who touches my person. Flora was surprised by what he said. She pursed her lips tightly, thinking back in her mind. My person. Outside at this time, enemy artillery flew in, exploded. The fire flared up very loudly. The wall collapsed due to the explosion like a person being swallowed by the fire. The surrounding guards shouted and informed each other. The wall collapsed. Prepare the barricade. Back inside the room, the conversation between the two continued. Flora agreed. I will satisfy all the conditions you put forth. She closed her eyes and shouted. So please kill all those Barco bastards. Facing the enemy's attack, the soldiers were talking. The enemy is coming. Don't let them get close to the wall. And Lord Lawrence Lean commanded. We must defend the wall. Continue to hold out. Finished. An enemy had already climbed the wall. He held his sword and rushed towards the Lord. The soldiers saw that the situation was not good and shouted. Master, be careful. The situation was extremely worrying. The blade was only a few centimeters away from his face. Fortunately, at that moment, an arrow carrying great power flew over and shot that guy off the wall. And the person holding the same arrow that shot it was her. He turned his head to look at his daughter. Flora, she immediately replied. Father. With a determined gaze, Flora looked into the distance. We must open the city gate and confront the three of you directly. Lord Lawrence panicked. What are you talking about? Open the city gate. Her tone was full of certainty. Roman Dmitri has promised to help us. Roman's image appeared following behind with many elite soldiers. She proposed a solution. If we distract their attention by opening the city gate, then Roman Dmitri will be able to command his troops to destroy their cannons. Her father wondered. Roman Dmitri, but why? Flora was in a hurry. I don't have time to explain. But I know for sure. Speaking of this, she smiled with confidence. That Roman Dmitri was a man of his word. The magic stone used for communications suddenly went out. He stared at it. His eyes seemed to be thinking. The vice captain asked, shall we attack immediately? Roman replied, no. Chris did not understand and was worried. If we hesitate any longer, the Lawrence family will lose. Chris cited evidence for his words. Cannons are powerful siege weapons. If you really intend to stop the Barcos plan by helping the Lawrence family. Looking at the distant castle that was gradually being destroyed by fire, the vice captain said something obvious. Then we must attack their camp immediately. Roman looked at the young man Chris with a cold face. Why'd I have to do that? Seeing his still confused expression and way of speaking, Bang answered, whether the Lawrence family lost or not is not important to me. Roman called, Chris. A pile of corpses appeared before him. He judged, instead of the death of hundreds of people he didn't know. Making sure his people didn't bleed was important. The murder of a soldier was obvious. Lawrence would lose many people because of this. Then came the corpses of others. He said, but that was also partly because they chose to support an incompetent master. Finally, Roman concluded that he was different from them. He didn't intend to force anyone who had sworn to support him to become a meaningless sacrifice. Hearing that ideal, Chris said with sweat dripping down his face. Watching his back gradually go away, he stood up straight. I understand. The wooden gate shook. Someone shouted, open the gate. That wooden gate fell. Those evil bastards of the Barco family must be punished. Lord Lawrence ordered. Where are the troops? The soldiers holding swords and shields ran out. They shouted loudly with great enthusiasm. The general was laughed at with contempt. You guys don't seem to know where your position is. He used the axe to chop off a man's arm with the first blow. The second blow cut off the soldier's neck. He created a scene of blood flying everywhere and laughed loudly. They are the BG mercenary group. The army just came out to block and saw their comrades' bodies were all broken. All the soldiers showed fearful expressions. Don't know which one went up first. Save. We're going to die. The soldiers ran in panic. Flora stood on the command tower. Had to hold on to the end. Couldn't retreat. Miss Lamb entered slowly. If we don't make a good impression, Han won't appear. The sound of horse hooves galloping on the ground rumbled. The sound reached the place where the troops were stationed. Lord Barco turned his head and asked, what is that? It turns out that Roman and his army are riding their horses. He thought to himself, war. The moment his soldiers had to bet their lives earlier than expected. The army of soldiers including Lucas rode their horses. Hesitation appeared on Chris's face. And worry appeared on Kevin's face. Roman opened his eyes wide. The reality that they had to face. If you survive like my soldiers, I promise to let you live a life. He held his sword and led the soldiers to run. But in the end, your strength and will are what determine whether you can survive or not. Roman loudly commanded. Our priority in this march will be to attack Barco from behind and destroy their siege weapons. He gave a prediction and a reassurance. Lawrence likely would not be provoked by my actions. So I did not expect too much about you guys in this march. With an emotionless face, he declared, I will be the vanguard myself. With the voice of a supreme commander, Roman continued, I will slaughter the soldiers in front of our army to open the way. So what you need to do is follow me and wipe out the remnants. But remember, our main priority is to destroy the siege weapons. At the present time, Barco's army looked at the horse army galloping towards. He was angry. Did they really think they could do it with just a few soldiers like that? Lord Barco ordered a soldier. Immediately prepare to welcome the crazy new guests. He immediately raised his sword high and replied. Understood. His soldiers lined up in a row of shields, pointing their spears outwards. A seemingly solid line of defense, blocking his horse's advance. But no. Roman held his sharp sword and slashed down through the defense and cut off those soldiers. He recalled, the people of the Orthodox martial arts sect once had a saying. At the same time, the spear first pierced the horse. Roman stepped on the saddle. Continued his train of thought. The heavenly demon was always the vanguard of the evil sect. He flew up. He slashed down the first blow. The heavenly demon was invincible. The blood of the soldiers splashed onto Roman's armor. Facing him alone was no different from committing suicide. He said to himself, people used to wonder why he took on the most dangerous role even though he had already become a demon. While facing the frightened army. Done. He immediately answered himself. The reason is always only one. Because the strongest person must be the vanguard to completely destroy the enemy's spirit. Those troops began to show fear. Always full of power surrounding Roman. He made a strong announcement. If you guys don't step forward, then leave it to me. Seeing this, Kevin clenched his teeth. He roared, attacked, followed closely by the Lord. Chris nursed his body, looked at him. The rest of the troops did the same. Everyone started to attack, opening a bloody path. An enemy on the Barco side stabbed his horse. Kevin's eyes showed blood. He raised his sword and slashed that enemy. I must. The slash went from the neck down to the heart. His tone was crazy, followed closely by my lord. His eyes widened. Chris held the sword firmly in hand, reminding himself, a little more. He also slashed a curve at the enemy side, just a little closer to the lord. At this moment, the Barco soldiers gathered in many rows, shouting cheers with great spirit. We must stop this monster. Not letting them finish, Roman continued to slash. His eyes were fixed on the front. That was our target this time. He slashed a sharp line and then rushed to the top object. BG mercenary couldn't believe his eyes. What was that? Was that Roman Dimitri? He thought of the chest full of gold. This mission had a huge reward but was full of risks. Because the fate of the BG mercenary group was in danger of bankruptcy. Aura surrounded. BG drew his sword. I have to finish him off with my own hands. The ground still had residual air friction when he flew away. Roman flew straight towards him. He secretly analyzed in his mind. BG, an A-class mercenary known throughout the Empire. Two sources of great power came from two men and touched the sword. Unlike B-class mercenaries, the soldier who reached the A rank knew how to use Asura. The aura emitted from the two swords continuously clashed with each other. While he used all his strength, he still leisurely assessed the opponent. BG was a 2-star Asura knight. He looked at him in surprise. Not moving at all, Roman smiled lightly. The sword aura from his side began to weaken. The blocking battle probably determined the winner. He swung his sword up. BG corrected his fever. Impossible. He was too strong. He turned to Roman's sword and charged forward, piercing through his body. 5 seconds. BG's body knelt down. That was the time an A-level mercenary could persist in resisting Roman. His body fell to the ground. His head was severed. The soldiers were extremely surprised and called him Captain. Chris and Kevin smiled brightly. In contrast to their army, the Lord's face was full of anger. He shouted loudly and pointed forward. Kill him. Please kill that bastard for me. The enemy stopped him. It's very dangerous. We have to take you to a safe place. Roman didn't care about them. What he was thinking about right now was the rocket. A product of magic that didn't exist in the martial arts world. The bright magic circle hanging high in front of Roman. He kept thinking about it in his head as he walked. Heavenly magic. Heavenly demon. Suddenly he brought the sword in front of him. Shouted. Heavenly demon sword technique. First move. The maximum power from the sword extended, penetrating that magic circle. The Barco people were stunned, seeing the scene appearing before their eyes. The so-called rocket was destroyed. It was falling. The whole thing collapsed. Only the shape of wooden pieces remained. He declared loudly to all the people present. Listen here, Lawrence I. Roman Dmitri. The West had to hold the sword straight up to the sky. The tone was majestic. Had destroyed her uncle's siege weapon. Everyone raised their hands, raised their swords to celebrate. Flora covered her face with both hands. It was unbelievable. He actually did it. After defeating BG, the A-level mercenary, Roman Dmitri stood right in front of the broken Barco's siege weapon. The fire was burning fiercely. The hem of his red cloak fluttered under the collapse of Free. At this moment, Barco had lost its key weapon. Had no choice but to retreat. The remnants of the army looking extremely miserable. In the distance were white flags symbolizing undeniable defeat fluttering. Those pathetic people ran away without any face, leaving behind Roman Dmitri a cloud of dust and rocks that were thrown up to the point of being condensed. Something a little strange happened. It was Chris. After the battle his silver armor was covered in fresh blood. And the strange thing here was, in this battle, Chris used Asura differently than before. He raised the sword in his hand and from his whole body to his sword, a bright and deep blue Asura was emanating. The vice-captain of the knight's blood-stained sword was continuously emanating that blue Asura. He tried his best to let her place Asura as much as possible like Roman did. And as a result, his mana consumption was not much. Even when he was fighting fiercely, he was laughed at by everyone around him when following Roman, but there was nothing in the scene that appeared now. Chris's brave back stood firmly there. Behind him were layers of miserable killings from the fallen soldiers of Barco. His power was radiating strongly. Chris was getting stronger. On the background of victory, his lips drew a confident smile. I had no choice but to admit. Bright blue eyes and a heroic smile under the bright sunlight. Chris retracted his sword bow self-confirmed that his lord's method was indeed correct. And then, after a while, he returned to reality to look at the scene happening around him. He let out a thud. In front of him was a group of allied soldiers who were panting and breathing heavily. Everyone was wearing sturdy iron armor and blood all over their bodies. In this moment, Chris suddenly realized and thought, I understand. All of them. The scene seemed to shrink to only Chris and the soldiers. His train of thought continued. To avoid being isolated, they had chased after the Lord in anger. They were clearly exhausted. At this point, a proud smile appeared on Chris's bright face. He was satisfied. And even so, not a single soldier out of 30 was left behind. And there were no serious injuries. Looking at those determined warriors, while they were tired and exhausted, Chris was sure of one thing. That is the reason the Lord chose them. The spirits were still panting non-stop. And he did not intend to use the inner monologue again. There was only one reason why we could be safe. Speaking of this, the image of a brave warrior appeared. His crimson robe and silver hair fluttering in the smoke and fire. He turned his back on the broken remains of the Barco, walking forward step by step. It was Roman Dmitri, and in Chris's mind, he was a monster that defied logic. The spirits were surprised by the scene before them. Their eyes widened in surprise as they looked towards Roman. At this moment, the face of the angel had enlarged in front of the soldiers. His silver hair was illuminated by the bright sunlight. He lowered his eyes, opened his mouth, and said to everyone. Everyone had done very well to survive. At this moment everyone was sure that they survived. All thanks to Roman Dmitri. A sigh of relief. We've completed the mission. The stone gate of the kingdom was right in front of the victorious army returning. A wooden bridge was broken by chains and the guns were lowered to open the way for the army. Leading was Roman Dmitri with a red cape of might, followed by soldiers with shiny silver armor. They walked with long strides on that wooden bridge and entered inside. The sun was shining and it seemed like everything wanted to welcome the victorious warriors returning. It was the splendor of victory, spreading throughout the surrounding atmosphere. As expected, right behind the seemingly silent stone gate, all the people of the kingdom, from the south to the north, from the old to the young, had been waiting there for a long time. Everywhere, there were loud cheers. The heroic light of Lawrence. Roman, thank you very much. Lawrence will never forget what Sir Roman Dmitri has done for us. But in the distance was the Lord of Lawrence. Glancing at Roman, he secretly sighed. What a pity. His expression remained passionate and his blue eyes stared blankly at Roman. I knew he was not gentle from the moment we met, but it was hard to believe that he could destroy the rocket himself. Roman Dmitri now appeared in everyone's eyes with a brilliant halo shining around him. And his lord's train of thought continued. Talent beyond imagination. Lord Lawrence now imagined Roman Dmitri as a war beast. Is a white tiger with a sky-high aura. Purple-blue light radiating out. He imagined himself standing in front of that white tiger from the firm affirmation, but with a trace of regret. Dmitri had given birth to a piece of tiger. If there was no mistake, then the piece of tiger would have been his son-in-law. He regretfully clenched his fist. It was indeed unfortunate, but that was already the past. Contrary to his inner self. On the surface, the Lord seemed extremely happy and rushed straight towards Roman with an excited expression. He smiled with his eyes and his arms raised in the air. Oh, the hero from Dmitri. Lawrence's lord extended his hand with the intention of shaking hands with him. His smiling face was a bit forced. I'm very happy to see you again. Facing the lord, Roman didn't say anything but just smiled. His sharp eyes piercing straight at the other person. They blandly shook hands. In the background sound cheers from the 100 nature disciples. The scene changes to the inside of the royal palace. The light from somewhere shines, highlighting every architectural detail of the palace. Roman's figure turns to face the wooden door with inlaid characteristic patterns. There is someone's shadow behind him. The other person speaks a little timidly. That is Flora. She is wearing the same silver armor. Her expression is a little timid. She speaks softly. Thank you. Facing Roman Dmitri, who seems to be intending to leave. Flora, with her armor skirt standing a distance away from him, still persistently continues her unfinished words of thanks. We didn't complete the bait mission properly, but he still didn't ignore it and helped Lawrence to the end. From Flora's perspective, Roman turned his head and looked straight at her. Flora continued, so I wanted to thank him sincerely. Dmitri didn't have the luck to let her words get to him. He frowned slightly and his face remained cold from beginning to end. He leisurely spoke. I only fulfilled my duty according to my promise. Without waiting or giving Flora a chance to continue, he continued, Laurent had done more than I expected. Hearing that, Flora understood, but she still continued that person's words. I understood, but no matter what, I still wanted to repay him. Maybe he didn't need any gratitude, but as Lawrence's representative, no matter what. Dmitri didn't have any expression when he heard that. He just silently listened to Flora continue. If you want something, please say it at the meeting. Her expression was firm and her eyes were shining. No matter what it was, I guarantee you will get it. But a thought slipped through her mind. Roman slightly stuffed it into the corner of his lips. His mouth smiled but his heart did not smile. He looked straight at Flora, giving her an answer. If she was still so determined, I would not refuse to do anything. With that, without further hesitation, Roman placed his hand on the handle of the conference room door. He confirmed the order and smiled at Flora. His brave arm pushed the door open, causing the dazzling light to flow out in all directions. Roman's voice rang out, let's go into the conference room. The conference room was large, Right in the middle of the room was a long and shiny wooden table, with people sitting on both sides. Roman sat at one end of the conference table. Dimitri's face was pensive, attentively listening to the words of the people present in the meeting. The meeting was discussing attentively. If we propose to end this matter, they should also agree, because Barco still has many soldiers, instead of continuing to go into danger and trouble. On the other side of the table opposite Roman was the Lord of Lauren and Flora standing next to him. The voices of the ministers continued to ring out, continuing with what had been said before. We should let go of the past and look towards peace. Hearing this, Roman seemed to take it lightly. He pursed his lips slightly. His eyes drooped. Thoughts began to run through his head. They are truly herbivores. In response to the discussions just now of the ministers, the Lord frowned slightly. His face solemnly expressed his approval. I agree with everyone's opinion. Even though we can block their attack with help, the time we can block Barco's attack with only Lauren's strength is limited. His voice continued, so I will send the message immediately. At this moment Roman's face turned cold. He opened his mouth. Can I speak up? His sudden words made the air in the room seem to freeze for a moment. Everyone was silent and no one spoke. Finally, the one who had the courage to break this heavy atmosphere was the Lord. He spoke. Say it. Just waiting for that. Dimitri. He stood up and spoke in a formal tone. Thank you. He stood up completely, walking and making the official beside him slightly shake as he spoke. Barco is currently facing economic pressure. Every step was brave and majestic. He swept his eyes across each face at the conference table, his voice unchanged. In order to repay the huge debt, they had no choice but to invade Lawrence, and that would not change even if Flair was destroyed. I would predict. Pause for a moment. Pause like this. His whole body exuded an aura that could not be ignored. What we received in return was the head of the messenger news. Hearing this, it seemed that some of the officials in the room had their own thoughts. They coughed a few times. Some others were silent, but their hands and feet still couldn't stand still. The Lord also became nervous when he heard this. Sweat poured down his cheeks, but he didn't know what to respond. He could only hear Roman's calm and indifferent voice as he continued speaking. The soldiers were still dragging to death outside. Did you feel empty when you saw that scene? That scene immediately appeared in everyone's mind. It was the scene of brave soldiers fighting on the battlefield. Being wounded, covered in blood, they supported each other to live together. And there were also living people supporting the dead. Roman's voice still did not stop. Barco cannot be forgiven. I must show everyone in the world. Standing in the middle of the meeting room. Mr. Ho Vang. How I will avenge those beasts who dare to touch Lauren. Faced with Roman Dimitri's harsh words, his lord was a little scared and did not know what to do. It was not that we did not know. But what could we do with this little strength? It seemed that right after the Lord finished his question, the young man immediately affirmed firmly. There was only one way. At this moment, his expression and aura were truly no different from a fierce tiger. That fierce tiger lowered its eyes to look down to the Lord like a small thing. The only lip smiling. There is only one way. Facing this image of Roman, the Lord was terrified. His eyes widened as he stared at him and his face gradually turned green. He understood what Roman meant. The herbivore had no choice but to become the prey of the beast keeper. In another place, on the side of the Barco stronghold, an angry scream rang out. The figure of the Barco lord appeared wrinkled. His face darkened into a wide-open mouth that wanted to crush to death the person whose name he was roaring. Roman Dimitri. For what reason did he interfere in this matter? His face was black as if the fire was burning fiercely. He muttered, to reverse this unfavorable situation. There was no other way but. The two faces of the Barco lord and Roman Dimitri seemed to appear at the same time. One side was extremely angry. The other side was cold. The eyes of both of them were shining with a dangerous light. And their voices also rang out almost at the same time. Duel. The day of the duel. When Roman Dimitri proposed a duel, it sparked an explosion of anger from Lord Barco, and not only Barco. His proposal also made Lawrence really worried. The Battle of the Great Land Temple? Returning to the scene of the meeting. After turning pale, Lord Lawrence now regained his composure. He frowned deeply, expressing his worries. The battle of the Great Land Temple not long ago had degenerated into a battle of relationships and resources. And his deep concern was still the opponent was Barco. That terrifying Lord Barco immediately appeared in Lord Lawrence's impression as a powerful person holding unlimited gold in his hands. Having connections with the central government. With the huge amount of money he borrowed from the gold bank. This was exactly what Lord Lawrence was deeply concerned about. He secretly thought of the giant-like tall man with eyes shining red-orange. The Lord wondered which master he would invite. Outside, the sky seemed to have turned to dusk. From the glass windows, the orange-yellow sunlight penetrated through the glass and shone on the characteristic tiled floor. Roman Dimitri's words resounded loudly. I understand. Under the gaze of the courtiers and under the bright sunlight, he opened his mouth and smiled with complete confidence and assured them. From now on we will give you a guarantee. At his words, the whole room suddenly fell into silence for a moment. The Lord pondered for a second. A moment later, as if both pondering and doubting, he expressed his feelings through an uncertain tone. A guarantee. Unshaken by the attitude of the Lord and his courtiers, the young man with platinum hair still maintained his own confident demeanor. Iandu looked down at the Lord and at the same time drew a confident but cold smile on the corner of my lips. There is no better way than the great battle ceremony. The ministers at the conference table didn't know how to respond. And perhaps they didn't have the right to respond. And just like that, Roman's powerful voice continued to resound steadily. First of all, Barco was a level 3 swordsman. Perhaps this was his first time participating. His face was still filled with overwhelming momentum. Confidently and firmly asserting, I will be Lawrence's representative and participate as the first competitor. His light purple eyes lit up and stared at the Lord. Whether the opponent was Barco's knight or an outside expert, I was still confident that I would win the number 1 position. Hearing this, the Lord's entire body shook a little. He looked up at Roman and his words still echoed throughout the room. I don't know how strong someone is in his hands. But if he wins the first time and loses the second time, it doesn't mean anything. Speaking of here, the figure of Chris, the vice-captain of the night squad, appeared in Roman's train of thought with a powerful blue Asura radiating from Chris. Roman's train of thought just now began. In the third match, my man Chris will complete the match. Although he is only level 2, he has the genius quality to be able to confront a level 3 knight and still be able to win. At this moment, Roman Dimitri looked towards the entire conference table and spoke loudly again under the attentive eyes of so many people. Then this match is very promising, right? If he wins the Grand Temple battle, Lawrence's reputation will be restored. The meeting ended. Walking out of the conference room, Roman immediately faced Flora. For a moment both of them did not know what to say to each other. But that silence did not last long. Roman restored his arrogant attitude and glared at her. Please make your decision. That sentence immediately ran straight into Flora's mind. And the memory of standing at the door of the meeting room appeared. She said, if you want something, say it in the meeting. She now thought, could it be? Could it be that this is what he wants? Flora's face turned pale at this moment. The bloody scene of the arena had already appeared in her eyes. He would attend the ceremony. Could it be that he was whispering that Lawrence would be responsible for the unforeseen events? In her eyes, Roman Dimitri, he was indeed a dangerous person. She closed her eyes tightly. I agreed to participate in the Great Field Temple battle. With the agreement of both sides, the Great Field Temple battle had been decided. The battle would take place within a week from the time the letter of command was sent. The scene changed to the arena. From somewhere came a loud shout. I am the Count. A man in a black cloak was called the referee of the Great Field battle. Count Otet shouted loudly with his loud voice, blocking the Great Field battle, which was a sacred place blessed by Valhalla. On one side of the arena were the Lords of Lawrence, Flora and Roman Dimitri. The other count's bark still rang out steadily. No matter what the result was, both families had to acknowledge that result. If either side violated this, the Cairo kingdom would judge with honor. On the other side, the figure of the Lord of Barco was grinning arrogantly. Next, Count Otet shouted loudly, Now invite the two families to nominate 3 swordsmen and submit the competition list. As if to show confidence or something. In the Barco kingdom. At this moment they were still leisurely pouring each other winebang. Roman looked over and saw that. Speechless. His eyes flashed with unprecedented coldness. And as if thinking of something, he immediately looked at Lord Lawrence and suggested, "Maybe we should change the order of the competition." He was suspicious. "What do you mean? We already decided a week ago." But actually that 1 week was the problem. The more time passed, Barco was under more pressure from the interest. He replied, "It seemed that the Barco family had intentionally dragged out the time." The others were still laughing and talking as usual. And now they were not in a hurry at all. As if he had also realized it. Lord Lawrence looked to the opposite side. Had they found a very strong expert in that period of time? There was a chair in the group of people who Barco was lazy to move. A rather street-weary man was lying on that small wooden chair and sleeping. And Roman's attention had turned to him since when? Lord Lawrence looked up at Roman in panic. So what should he do? Because originally, Roman Dmitri would be the first to go into battle to ensure the first victory. The second would be Lawrence's knight. And finally Chris would go into battle and end everything. A decision jumped out in an instant. But Chris would fight first. Hearing this, both Lord Lawrence and Flora were surprised. Roman Dmitri suddenly flared up with murderous intent. "I will fight second and confront the card that Barco had prepared," and so the plan was changed at the last minute. Cheers filled the entire arena. It seemed that many people were curious about the warrior who would fight first. On the main stage was a warrior of Barco. The other person was none other than Chris. Barco's soldier, a level 3 Halo swordsman, introduced himself. "I am Barco's Jensen." In response, Chris also spoke up. "I am Lawrence's Chris." After the introduction of the two, a commotion arose from the audience. Jonathan's disciple, Chris, wasn't that the one-time genius of the Northeast? Why send a level 2 swordsman to fight? Wasting a young talent. Ignoring those gossips, Chris recited an inner dialogue to himself. "To become stronger, we must feel the danger. That's why I escaped from the well and followed the Lord." The big field flag waved at the same time as the loud shout. Starting. It seemed like immediately, both Chris and Jensen wiped each other hard. A fiery sword strike from the position of the Barco warrior Jensen swung strongly towards Chris. Chris's train of thought at this moment was clear and ringing. The first time fighting the Lord, I realized a truth. He was lightning fast and dodged the sword strike from that god. I dodged it. Chris's target was pointed straight at Jensen. No matter how strong the halo was. Another fireblade slashed away from Chris. He continued. He had to avoid. His face was filled with fierceness. His eyes looked straight at the Barco swordsman. Had to match, then it makes sense. Just aim for them once. The other guy still blindly swung powerful but mindless sword strikes towards Chris. He shouted loudly, "You little rat, how long do you plan to run?" The red Asura was shining brightly and he was madly wiping at Chris. Dying. The blood-red halo that spread out was so huge. Was it a wide-spectrum halo? Chris opened his mouth in panic at this moment. I can't avoid this thing. What should I do? At this moment, Dimitri's voice sounded as if guiding him. Chris, throw away morality. His eyes lit up and his bright Asura aura immediately radiated strongly. He charged straight towards the enemy. All right, pouring mana indiscriminately won't maximize the power of the aura. Like the way the Lord shows off his power with just a small amount of mana. From one side to the other. From this line to that point. Concentrate the power of the aura. Both people on the arena had their eyes shining. Pointing to one point. A thunderous battle rang out and fresh blood shot everywhere. That Jensen's head fell. Immediately, the shouts of Chris's name shook the entire arena. Chris was panting. The level 2 swordsman who made me defeat the level 3 swordsman. On the sidelines was Roman Dimitri's satisfied smile. Now, next. The referee's voice rang out. The level 2 swordsman had defeated the level 3 swordsman. The audience was in an uproar. Impossible. Oh my god. Someone clenched their fists. Their voices trembling. Jensen lost again. Lord Barco gritted his teeth and thought. In the second match I thought everything would end. Now the final match is important. He comforted himself. It's okay. I don't need to worry about the second match. Looking at the waiting area, Barco was immediately sure in his heart. Because he had used a large amount of money to get this instant win card. After being informed that it was his turn, Himeros was immediately suspicious. Is it my turn yet? He slowly walked up the stairs. Yawned deeply. Himeros scratched his head and introduced. I am Himeros of Barco. This is Himeros the level 4 swordsman. When they saw the appearance of the eldest brother, Chris, Lawrence, Flora, their eyes widened in surprise and they secretly exclaimed, Himeros. The whole audience started to make a fuss. That wandering swordsman, why is he here? Living in this world can still be eyes see this level of swordsman. Himeros who ranked 49th. He let out a breath of frustration thinking. If it wasn't for the guild master asking then. The swordsman ranking originated from the Manhwa Empire. It was a holy land where swordsmen fought and died with honor. They traded their lives to reach Manhwa and wanted to prove their strength. The results of victory would be recorded. The names of the strong would be recorded in the documents. This was the origin of the swordsman ranking. Ranking used to be the culture of Manhwa. After the Manhwa Empire expanded its power, it spread throughout the continent. The selection of rankings up to the 100th position was all done by Manhwa. Lawrence thought in panic. I didn't think that Barco would give Himeros this level of great swordsman. Thinking back to his achievements, he couldn't help but sigh. No one in Cairo not knowing the identity of that person. He traveled around the kingdom, enjoying the joy of dueling with the strong. So everyone called him the wandering swordsman. The chatter in the stands continued to rise. I once heard that he fought a level 4 swordsman who was the 30th ranked leader. He just reached level 4 recently. This time he must be a failure. They finally won a match. What a pity. Below the arena, Himeros yawned in boredom. Someone just smiled. Roman thought. Level 4 swordsman. Through the guild's information, I investigated Barco's whereabouts. But what I gathered was only peripheral information. Looking at Himeros, he judged. The information that Barco was hiding was this big card? Roman is extremely curious. Really worth looking forward to. Just like the opponent hides his strength. They also can't guess what kind of person he is. This is an opportunity for them to see the battle of the strong that only exists in books. Seeing Roman go up to the stage, Flora grabbed his hand and shouted. Are you crazy? Give up, she said loudly. The opponent is Himeros ranked 49th. On the sword master level. When rank 1 is a legend. He is a strong person who is evaluated to climb to rank 30 in the future. Flora worriedly said urgently. Do you think you can really win against a swordsman of that level? Just give up and save your life. She continued to rambling and prayed that her team would win the next match. Himeros turned his head. His eyes became sharp. When he met the eyes of Roman immediately gave a very determined look about himself. He didn't like it at all. Flora was still advising him. With this huge variable, we have no choice but to give up. Let's skip this match. She shouted. This match has no chance of winning. There is no reason for him to trade his life. Roman shook Flora's hand away. Then replied to her in an annoyed tone. I don't like having to explain to anyone. Don't ruin things anymore. Roman's robe fluttered in the wind. He proudly stepped onto the stage and loudly introduced himself. I am Roman Dimitri. Roman drew out his golden sword. Himeros on this side also drew his sword and took a defensive stance. Looking at him, Roman secretly evaluated. If it was his ability. He was too small. A level 4 swordsman was considered a high-ranking person on the entire continent. Let's see how strong he was. Himeros on this side was also extremely upset. He should have fought Fernando, who was ranked 30th in the new rankings. Yes. But I have to participate in these uninteresting matches. He shouted. Let's finish it quickly. Immediately rushed towards Roman like a gust of wind. Greet in horror. That speed. Unexpectedly, Roman's golden sword quickly blocked Himeros's sword strike. He gently dodged his head to the side to avoid the tip of the sword. Then quickly turned around causing Himeros's sword strike to miss its trajectory. He was extremely excited when he saw this. Look at this. What an interesting kid. 3 consecutive sword strikes. Roman held his glowing sword firmly. Himeros became crazy and shouted. How did you block my 3 moves? Roman thought dejectedly. He had expected a decent duel, but he was looking down on him and didn't fight with all his might. Himeros began to release energy. The 3rd move was extremely sword. He loudly said, how interesting. I will seriously fight you in this match. The entire arena seemed to be oppressed by the countless thunders Himeros created. The crowd in the stands were terrified. It was big. His power was too terrifying. Hold on tight. Roman definitely hated the evaluation. Someone like this was ranked 49th. What nonsense. He made up his mind. There was no reason to prolong the match. Step towards Himeros, Roman called. The hand holding the sword had been covered by a strange light since when. He immediately said, try to block this move of mine. The demon sword technique. Invisible. Himeros stood frozen in place before that sword technique. Don't you think this sword? He was extremely terrified when it was about to touch him. He used this sword technique. Really? The battle no mercy. The ultimate move is not named. Roman coldly held the sword. It was only called in order. He observed for a while. Then closed his eyes and thought to himself. The demon sword technique. That is the 3rd. Back a few days before the match took place. The guild master was sitting in the room talking. Himeros, I know you are looking forward to the match with Fernando, but this time you should consider our stance. He sat on the desk looking at him who was lying on the chair, reminding. This is a great field battle between the border clans. You should think of this as a chance to rest. Himeros rested his head on his hand and sighed. In fact, after receiving the A-class mercenary card, all the missions were rejected. Traveling all over the kingdom. Busy fighting the strong. He smiled wickedly. There was no reason to refuse. Back to reality. The match had already taken place. Miss Flora's beautiful face showed shock. In the stands, everyone who witnessed the match was also very surprised. Looking at Himeros being beaten and lying on the ground, everyone had the same question. He was a strong person who climbed the rankings before reaching 4 stars. The contrast between him and Roman standing proudly made people admire. He reached 49th place but was immediately defeated. Roman glared. A person who could not climb to the top but was quite arrogant really deserved to die. He put his sword back. This was not a world with life and death competition according to Roman's evaluation standards. Recalling his previous life in the martial arts world, it was completely different. In his previous life there were elite martial arts masters. That was a world full of dangers. You could lose your life at any time. But here it was like a garbage dump. Roman turned away coldly, saying, "Urge. Referee day." The referee was startled when he just mentioned himself. Roman had to speak first for him. Announce the result. Then, the referee remembered his duty and shouted loudly. The winner of the second match, Roman Dmitri. All the soldiers who just heard the announcement were shocked and incredulous. What was going on? The 2 soldiers who just witnessed it were also shocked. Himeros is dead. Am I hearing wrong? Chris clenched his fist to prevent himself from revealing too many emotions. He thought in surprise. This is exactly His Majesty's strength. From surprise to worry, Chris looked puzzled. Since I fought him, has his strength reached this level? Otherwise, after fighting me, has he improved so much? Chris suddenly remembered the time when the 2 of them fought. Roman at that time clearly could not be the one who could defeat Himeros in such a short time. Unbelievable. He looked at Roman, who was slowly walking down the stage. His heart still filled with thoughts. Could this happen? He became more and more worried. The first match I defeated my opponent with 2 moves. I thought it wouldn't be long before I would surpass him. Chris is so stubborn. My thinking is too narrow. The family flag fluttering high in the air was the announcement of Roman's victory. The Battle of the Great Tien Temple had already decided the winner. There was no reason to waste manpower. Know how to accept the change of the referee list, loudly announced. The 2 sides have decided the winner. The Lord heard the news. His hands clenched. His head bowed. His whole body trembled with anger. He stared blankly. It's over. Thoughts kept wandering in his head. After all, Homerus had failed. Homeros was a 4th-level swordsman. He was different from the lowly people of the northern region, a rare swordsman in the entire kingdom. The more he thought, the more difficult it was for him to accept the truth and put forward a stubborn hypothesis. Could it be that the mercenary guild had brought a fake Homerus? His subordinates came forward to announce, "Our lord will offer a large field." He objected, "We can't lose anymore." The lord bowed his head and ordered, "Take Benson away." The other guy was surprised by his decision as soon as he heard it. He had lost the honor of Barco at a banquet knife. Then he knelt down and begged Roman cowardly, "Please let it go this time. This battle is the chance to save that." The other guy bowed his head in obedience, thinking to himself, "Benson." An unknown knight turned out to be telling him to go find death. On the stage at this time was a big but timid guy. He was trembling and holding his sword forward. "I am Benson Barco." Everyone below saw Han and whispered, "Who is that knight they met for the first time?" Chris and Kevin saw it and immediately fell silent. Footsteps were running. Kevin quickly ran in front of Roman and suggested, "Young master, I will fight him." The boy's eyes looked straight ahead. His face was immature but his eyes were very determined. Roman looked at him without saying anything. In the world where the big eat the small, the loser is destined to die. The nameless knight was also quite difficult for Kevin. He wanted to prove himself. Looking at the way he stood, he seemed very confident. Roman smiled slightly and reminded him to be careful. Just waiting for that, he quickly responded to him and turned around to leave. "I will not let you down." On the stage at this time, Benson was trembling, blaming himself for being punished in this situation. He was so scared that he held his sword tightly with both hands. Thanks to his father who was a knight that he was not worried. Benson gritted his teeth. Even if he was a useless knight of Barco, he would do his best for Barco. But the price of this loyalty is in the damn battle of the great field. He just looked up at his opponent and froze for a moment. Kevin's small steps slowly walked up to the platform. Kevin just looked up at him and asked himself, could it be that he was his opponent? Thinking of this, Benson revealed a strange smile as if he had just escaped death. "Oh my God, thank you." The two of them started fighting. At first glance, one could guess that this was a completely unequal match. He happily covered his mouth and laughed. Benson threatened, "This kid, if you want revenge, whether you volunteer or forced, we are all abandoned by the Lord." He secretly rejoiced. However, for me it was a lucky thing. Kevin did not pay attention to what he said boldly. "I am a sword that protects the Lord." Benson shouted and swung his sword and charged. "Come to him. Arrogant guy, go die." The sharp sword aimed straight at his head but Kevin quickly dodged. Taking advantage of his small figure, he threw the sword from below when he jumped. The sharp tip of the sword almost pierced Benson's neck. He angrily kicked and cursed while kicking straight. This bastard. Just one kick was enough to make Kevin fall on the ground. The helmet on his head was also kicked away. Fresh blood dripped onto the tiled floor. He leaned on his sword and tried to stand up. Chris stood from afar watching the battle with a worried heart. The gap in strength was quite large. He looked at Roman who was still silently watching, even more confused. What was the young master thinking to let Kevin join the battle? Kevin had just managed to stand up when he was attacked by Benson. He launched consecutive attacks, making him unable to contain his anger and curse. "You bastard." Under Benson's relentless attacks, he still tried to stand firm. In his mind, a strong source of motivation rang out. "Kill, kill. He wants to kill you. Quickly take revenge." It seemed to have increased his strength many times. In his head, Roman's stern voice resounded, teaching him to cut off his own hand from today. The ghost spirit attack has taken hold and awakened the demon inside you. Kevin's whole body seemed to have a new source of strength about to burst out. His eyes were still red with blood. His head kept ringing with voices. Thinking carefully, right then was a direct attack from the top of Benson's head. He strongly aimed his sword at him and slashed down. But he quickly dodged to the side. Benson seemed a bit surprised by Kevin's quick reflexes. In his head, a strange laugh rang out again, almost breaking his head. "I will tear that bastard to pieces." Kevin gently rubbed his head and silently asked, "Why is my head so noisy?" Deep inside him, a strong motivation was rolling up, urging him to become the young master's right-hand man more than Chris. Kevin felt his body getting hotter and hotter. The inferiority complex, the loyalty towards his master, the emotions in his heart were all mixed up like a raging whirlpool. He clenched the sword in his hand. The time had come. It was the work of a ghost and a demon. The demon inside him was stirring up a strong, continuous laugh, killing Kevin like a demon. His cloudy eyes holding the sword and flying straight towards Benson. He stood there, stunned. What was this? The tip of the sword stabbed straight into Benson's back, piercing through the armor. The armor was a bit hard, making Kevin stop for a moment. He swung his sword loudly. This bastard. Kevin continued to attack with great enthusiasm. This made him even more afraid. Tears flowed from his eyes. Why don't you stop? This bastard. You're crazy. He didn't say anything. His eyes became even more red and terrifying. And as expected, the power of the demon chain helped him stab the sword straight through the rock-hard armor. Witnessing this scene made Chris startled and surprised. The entire audience below couldn't hide their surprise. On the stage, the match seemed to be Benson's victory. But now he was lying under Kevin's sword. He grinned a devilish smile. Then pulled back the sword. Fresh blood sprayed out along the drawn sword like a waterspout. In the dark scene, he added a rain of blood like a red worm, making the entire arena extremely gloomy. Miss Flora and her father were scared to the point of being absent-minded. Fresh blood was everywhere, all over his armor. Kevin stood proudly admiring his own achievements. Then he hurriedly ran down from the platform. Kevin came to Roman, knelt down respectfully and reported, "I'm back." Roman smiled with satisfaction at him. "Kevin, you've worked hard." Kevin raised his head and smiled brightly. After the battle, the demon gave way to the obedient and loyal boy. Lawrence and Barco's great field battle. Lawrence won overwhelmingly, and in the center was also Roman Dmitri. Like a heroic legend passed down for generations, rumors of truth and falsehood mixed together. People began to praise Roman's achievements everywhere. In a certain tavern, the table was filled with the smell of food, and a large beer mug as big as a jar had just been placed on the table. People were whispering about what they had just heard. "Have you heard anything?" Two men sat together chatting animatedly. "That great field battle. Barco must have been very angry, making a big fuss and then finally losing the battle to Lawrence." The man at the next table also loudly said, "Sen. You know my relatives are all natives of Lawrence, right?" They spread the word that Roman was Lawrence's savior, able to single-handedly slaughter hundreds of Barco's rearguard soldiers at once. The blonde guy took a sip of beer and drank it all, adding to the fun. Moreover, even the players were destroyed with just one attack. Everywhere people were praising. If Roman hadn't appeared, Barco would have planted a flag on Lawrence's land long ago. The red blood of Himeros ranked 49th in the Cairo kingdom. Horus put an end to the great temple battle. On the streets, children pretended to be Brother Hovang. "I am Lawrence's Roman Dmitri." His fame spread everywhere. Roman Dmitri is a hero. The Dmitri family is the hidden dragon that has finally ascended. This is the golden time for Roman to make people remember and admire. "I will officially collect every anecdote about myself." In contrast to that excited atmosphere, at this time in the city, Barco covered a gloomy atmosphere. In the study room, across the books, the Lord's voice was disappointed. It was over. He held his head in frustration. It was really over. The article in front of him made him even more frustrated. The document urging the principal and interest of the Horus Gold Bank from the Mercenary Guild to take full responsibility and compensate the workers. Too angry, the Lord slammed his fist on the table and cursed the damned thief. The papers on the table fell like a dream. He recalled the days when everyone praised him, shaking hands and greeting him with regret. All this time when Barco had influence in the northeast region. Every day Barco was sought after. Now he pretended not to know him like this. He was angry. Damn it, as long as that bastard Roman Dmitri didn't interfere in this matter. He paused for a moment. Now the name Roman made him remember clearly. It must be all because of Roman Dmitri. Roman Dmitri did something unacceptable in the noble society. The Lord just came up with another sinister plan. This time was the last chance to save Barco. A few days later Lord Barco held an important roundtable meeting. He cautiously declared, "Before starting to talk, I would like to sincerely thank the nobles who came to Barco. Thanks to you, sir, I feel that the future of the entire Northeast is still bright." A bearded noble impatiently interrupted. "Let's get straight to the point." The uncle continued, "Then I will speak frankly. Just like Barco using his legitimate identity to attack Lawrence, reputation among the nobles is also a very important matter." The guests listened silently. The Lord began to get to the main point. This battle was to repay the debt to the ancestors. The central government thought that this was the right thing to do and even sent judges. But Roman Dmitri did not have any status to intervene in this battle. He angrily accused him of Barco losing players because of his surprise attack. Even Lawrence's warriors who fought in the Battle of the Great Field Temple did not lose a single one. He banged the table loudly. "Does this sound reasonable? What right does Roman Dmitri have to help Lawrence?" From the beginning to the end, he blamed Roman. If the two families had a marriage relationship, there would be no problem. But we all know that Dmitri and Lawrence have broken off their engagement. To Lawrence, Roman Dmitri is an outsider who has no status at all. He sat solemnly and made the final conclusion. This was an act that went beyond the limit. The whole room was silent for a moment. Then everyone spoke in agreement. "Sir, you are right. Roman Dmitri has no status." "That's right. The initial success." He chuckled. "Okay, that's enough." The cunning lords secretly planned, pushing all the responsibility to the Dmitri family and receiving a huge compensation. The debt to the gold bank would also be resolved. Sliding outside the door make a loud noise. Roman suddenly walked in to greet. "So everyone is here." He chuckled hearing that everyone is dissatisfied with me. If so then. He looked at him in shock. Roman, what was he thinking showing his face here? Roman dangerously looked at him and said each word clearly. "I will personally tell Viscount Barco." "Back a few days ago," Chris exclaimed worriedly. "Are you really going to Barco? Doing so would be like committing suicide. There's no way Viscount Barco would leave his lord alone." Roman interrupted him and said, "Chris, have you thought about what will happen to the relationship between me and Barco in the future?" He explained slowly. "In the mind of the master, Barco is an enemy who cannot be reconciled under the same roof. If possible, I think the two should avoid each other." Roman said coldly, "No. If it doesn't start, it's fine not to know. But if it starts, it must end." Then he jumped on the horse, emphasizing the sentence. "There is a very clear fact that Barco has a grudge against me." Chris was stunned. He continued, "If so, this is the right opportunity to take revenge on them." Roman smiled goodbye. "I will go alone." Chris just stuttered, "Master." He walked into the room where the Lord Barco was meeting with everyone and asked the question. "I was also curious. What title did Barco use to create this position?" He gritted his teeth. Barco. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked down on him in his heart. He was just a brat born from the Baron's family but had not inherited the position. "So dare to look down on my rank?" He showed his disdain. "You're here, probably because of your humble origin. You don't understand the laws of the nobility. Then let me tell you." He clenched his fist and continued to tell him. "Without any status you dare to intervene in the war. It is an action that is not allowed in the Kingdom of Cairo. We were granted the status of the nobles according to the law, approved by the central government before doing anything. Declaring a challenge." His voice was full of defiance. "Do you think that the nobles are stupid so they created that procedure? It's just to keep each other's honor." Then he slammed the table hard, saying that not understanding the nobles' law is just making excuses. He shouted even more fiercely. "Now do you know how stupid you have been? Because of you the Dmitri family has encountered serious trouble." His face was expressionless. He was getting angrier and angrier because of the crime caused by his son. And the nobles of the Northeast had blamed him. After he finished speaking, he sat down. The whole room fell into silence. He calmly asked him, "Have you finished speaking?" Lord Barco was surprised. "What?" You smiled sinisterly. "Then now, It's my turn to talk about my identity. He stared at me with wide eyes. You began to tell. Lawrence and Dmitri were originally two families who had a marriage contract with each other. But now I have become the fool who broke the marriage contract between the two families. What do you think is the reason I broke off the engagement? Is it my reputation? Or my behavior? All those rumors are wrong. Then he pointed to the Lord Barco the truth. It was Barco's eldest son. Due to Anthony Barco's intimidation. He immediately stood up in shock. He continued slowly. Now is the time for Barco to return to the evil cult. Someone who was close to Anthony Barco like me joined his side. Before he had an engagement with Lawrence, I fell into his trap. When I woke up, I found myself in a room with Emily Barco. Anthony used that to threaten, then demanded to cancel the engagement with Lawrence. He was cold. This was the perfect trap to eliminate Lawrence and Dmitri. Everyone immediately started to gossip. Threatening. So that means the Barco family's policy. He laughed triumphantly. It's time to reveal your weakness. It will no longer be a weakness. He shouted loudly. Do you think I will listen to your nonsense? We all know that you have lived a life of a half-ton. To hide the truth, you dare to say any disgusting words. He smiled faintly. I knew you would say that. He turned to look at him. I will give you another reason. Causing me to intervene in the war between Barco and Lawrence. He didn't believe it. Another reason. Anthony Barco has crossed the line with my betrothed. Flora Lawrence has been harassed by him. Because of that influence, Flora has decided to choose to cancel the engagement. His face was serious suggestion. Is this true or not? Try asking Flora Lawrence. He had already decided to take revenge in his heart. Anthony's lies had trapped him. If so, he would do the same. He clenched his fists in anger. If I had intervened in the war with only my own strength and not dragged the daman into it. That was the only revenge I could do for her. He was determined. I want to ask Viscount Barco and everyone present here. Is there really no status to intervene in the war? And Roman twisted Barco's point like that and got the status. He began to panic. There was no other way. Fighting about the truth of the status was meaningless anymore. Had to buy more time. For now had to avoid this situation to find a solution. He calmed down. I don't think what you said is true. But I will confirm again if they are true. You go back today. He called him. Viscount Buru. Now you make a choice. You choose Anthony to pay the price due to personal problems with me to end the matter. Hey. His eyes were full of threats. Or is it causing trouble for the entire family just because of this? If you don't make a choice here, right now, I'll go home and tell my father everything. Lord Barco turned pale and was shocked. What? Absolutely do not choose to declare war on Dmitri. Already at rock bottom and still involved with the Dmitri family. Then Barco will be destroyed. His hands trembled unconsciously. That cruel man. He gave a condition. I don't want to tear the matter between you and Anthony into a problem for the entire family. With my authority, I will make Anthony's eldest son kneel before you to apologize to you. Okay? He immediately refused. I told Anthony to kneel before me when? He didn't believe what he just heard. What do you mean? He had made his own decision. In this world, how could someone who harmed others choose their own punishment? I will decide the punishment. After everyone left, Anthony begged him, Father, Father. But he could only shake his head. Sorry, son. He knelt down and hugged his legs, crying in disbelief. Absolutely, absolutely not. Dual verdict. Did you really hand my life over to someone else? He cried even more miserably. He would definitely kill me. Please, Father, reject Roman's offer. He grabbed his hand and shouted. Wake up quickly. You are the eldest son of the Barco family. From the moment you became the heir of the family, your life is tied to the fate of the family. He gritted his teeth in anger. So face reality. Don't forget this hell. And be determined to give up an arm. He walked quickly, passing by his son who was kneeling on the ground. In his heart, he could only cry and beg for help. Father, Father, please, Father.